Wow. Hey, how you guys doing? Much love and respect. Pura vida, mi gente. Thanks for tuning in once again. I appreciate you guys taking the time to do that. Today, we're just going to continue reading a book we've been reading. Just continue that. And especially, we dropped a video on some of the history of Haiti. We're actually going into a chapter of this book, which is going to be talking about the so-called Haitians and the island, Hispaniola. And again, the book we're going to get into again today is The 10 Tribes of Israel, historically identified with the Aborigines of the Western Hemisphere by Mrs. Simon. All right, this is from 1836. Yep, 1836. And so we go to page 225 of this book, and it says here, Haitians. Let's see what they have to say. Although the following notices of Haiti, whose history is that of all the Western islands, so the history of Haiti is kind of combined to the history of all the Western islands, not just Haiti, cannot be said to augment the sum of historical and internal proof, which it is the object of this work to point out. It furnishes in that identity of suffering, which at that same period marked the race wherever it existed, that kind of relative and subordinate evidence which cannot be withheld without impairing the homogeneity of the piece. Nor are the coincidences which contribute to the unity of the eventful portraiture to be overlooked. For neither was it fortuitous that Columbus should have been not only of the same race, but of a royal lineage of that race, of whose territorial seclusion he was the discoverer. All right, we talk about Salvador Fernandez Sarco and his royal lineage. Remember, his grand uncle is King Henry, the navigator, or Prince Henry. Or that the same year had to record in this discovery of his an ascension to the crown of Spain of one portion of his kindred, and the expulsion of 600,000 of another portion from the Spanish dominions. It is impossible, writes the late biographer of Columbus, to refrain from dwelling on the picture given by the first discoverers of the state of manners in this eventful island before the arrival of the European man. The people of Haiti existed in that state of primitive simplicity which some philosophers have fondly pictured as the most inviolable on earth. Inviolable, meaning envy. They were envious of the Haitians. Remember what we read about Haiti and how the Spanish were describing, not only Haiti, but many of the islands, but, Haiti, especially a lot of the time, they were saying how beautiful it was. There was orchards everywhere, high mountains, things growing everywhere. And people were living in the golden age in Hispaniola. We read this. They literally said that. They wrote these things. They were envious of the people of Hispaniola. Surrounded by natural blessings without even the knowledge of artificial wants. They had everything, all the sources they needed, all the resources they needed. Hospitality was with them a law of nature, universally observed. There was no need of being known to receive its succor. Every house was open to the stranger as his own. Charleville's history of Santo Domingo, all right, Saint Domingue. These were hospitable people, all right, just like many other Indian nations. Columbus was neither insensible to the virtue and happiness of the inhabitants of the Western Islands, nor reluctant in eulogizing it. The inconsistency, therefore, between his conduct and those benevolent feelings to which he was naturally disposed, is to be attributed to that pernicious system of theology with which he was blindly identified, and with the inebriating spirit of which he was deeply imbued. All right? Do they mean that he was forced to be a Christian, but he was really a Sephardic Jew? He deeply imbued his spirit somewhere else? Those who are acquainted with his early determination, stimulated as it was by the promptings of genius and those peculiar studies to which he devoted his attention, may in some measure be enabled to account for the confidence with which he pledged himself in an appeal to the avarice of the sovereign to make rich returns to Spain in the event of the contemplated discovery of the Western Indies. All right. I'm going to go to that footnote right here where it says 1, all right? And it says that in his tender years, he applied himself to the study of cosmography, astrology, and geometry, all right? Columbus studied a lot of ancient records, guys, because those sciences are linked together. And because Ptolemy, at the beginning of his cosmography, says that no man can be a good cosmographer unless he be a painter too. Therefore, he learned to draw in order to describe lands and set down bodies, planes, and realms. To their Catholic majesties, in the year 1501, he thus writes, Most serene princes, I went to sea very young, and have continued to this day. And this art inclines those that follow it to be desirous to discover the secrets of the world. It is now 40 years since I have been sailing to all those parts at present frequented, and our Lord has been favorable to this my inclination, and I have received from him the spirit of understanding. All right, so that's Columbus saying, hey, I got the experience, I know cartography, hey, I know I can bring you the secrets of the world, huh? The secrets of the world, huh? America, the true old world, huh? He knew it was there. It's not, how did he know it was a secret in the first place? It says here, continuing, the position in which he stood, alive as he was to those impressions of honor which chivalry had borrowed from the slumbering line of his race, was that at once bound to redeem his pledge to Europe in that demonstration of which he had declared his nautical principles capable, and to the allied sovereigns in realizing those profits, which in their minds were identified with the terms Indies, profits, Indies, Indies, same as profits, it's all money for them. But together with these motives, there was the ambition of adding his name to those of illustrious lineage. See appendix. These considerations may explain the solicitude with which Columbus sought to effect the objects of his enterprise. But for the methods which he took in the transfer of those fatal profits to the treasury of Spain, involving, as these did, the practical inversion of the law of God, a solution must be found in that sorcery, which by ecclesiastical decrees could convert crimes of the deepest moral turpitude into consecrated auxiliaries, and promoting the views and maintaining the interests of the church, and into meritorious acts of the faith, and extending and enforcing her authority. All right, you hear what you guys are saying here? Subliminally, they're saying, yeah, they made it okay for them to come here and murder people, commit genocide and all that, because they were consecrated auxiliaries, promoting the views and maintaining the interests of the church. So they made it okay because they were converting, they were bringing Christianity to the savages, huh? They made it okay, forcing their authority. Thou shalt not covet, rob, murder could have been evaded by ingeniously torturing the words out of their integrity, or by stigmatizing them as legal vestiges of that law which the infallibility of the church had superseded. But it was more expedient to grant absolution to these crimes and constitute them at once commendable and holy as means subserving the all-redeeming end of compelling the victims of these crimes to come into that salvation of which the church was the administratrix, guardian, monopolist, and fold. Thus we find Columbus consoling himself with the available donation which out of this guiltily acquired gain he had devoted towards a pilgrimage to the Holy Land, in order to aid in rescuing the Holy Sepulchre out of the hands of the comparatively God-honoring disciples of the false prophet. At other times we find him in the midst of a storm at sea, vowing to go barefoot to one and another image and shrine of Our Lady under the strong delusion that acts of will worship which supplied the want of obedience, and that such penances were not only advantageous as the means of obtaining pardon and reconciliation, but in procuring an identity for such meditated acts of transgression as expediency might render equally indispensable in future. In writing of the Castilian sovereigns, the admiral thus characterizes the inhabitants of Haiti and Lucayans, right? The Lucayans and the Haitians, right? The Indians of Hispaniola. I swear to your majesty that there is not a better people on all the world than these, all right? He couldn't have met any better people, right, in all his life. More affectionate or mild, They love their neighbor as themselves. Their language is the sweetest, all right? Again, their language is the sweetest and most cheerful, for they always speak smiling. They always speak smiling. You see how people were living, how people's spirits were before they got here? Again, he writes, I have before protested to your highness that the profits of the enterprise shall be employed in the conquest of Jerusalem, at which your highness smiled and said, you had the same inclination. All right. You see all this subliminal talk, right? He's taking pilgrimages to holy lands, huh? He came to the Americas, right? So there's the Holy Land. Then he's talking about conquest of Jerusalem. We talking about Utah, over there, Ohio. Where you talking about? What Jerusalem? City of David, Peru. Talking about Palenque. Which one? Hmm. He expressed his belief that a ton of gold would be collected. All right, that gold against his return, and that the seamen would find the mines, so that before 3 years the king and queen might undertake the recovery of the Holy Sepulchre. Listen, so you can recover what? But he's in America, right? So what is he talking about? Suggestion, moreover, that the Caribbean Indians should be exchanged with the merchants of Spain. For domestic animals, for the use of the colony. Who? Not Africans, right? He's literally saying, let's enslave them. Let's exchange for the what? The use of the colony for domestic animals, huh? Caribbean Indians, huh? Not Africans. Caribbean Indians. In a letter to Luis de San Angel, this is the guy that financed him, a Sephardic Jew, Santangel, the admiral observes, true it is, that after they felt confidence and lost their fear of us, they were so liberal with what they possessed that it would not be believed by those who had not seen it. If anything was asked of them, they never said no, but rather gave it cheerfully, and showed as much amity as they gave their very hearts. You see how they were treating the Europeans all nice, all good, with love, hospitality, like, and you see what they ended up doing? His first voyage was reconnaissance. He was there scouting. And then when he came back on his second expedition, he brought an army to conquer and invade. Right? He tricked the Indians. Columbus exerted himself to send satisfactory proofs of the value of his discovery, and that the royal treasury might the sooner be reimbursed for the expenses of the discovery and colonization. He sent 500 Indians. Listen, again, who? Just Columbus alone, right? Remember they said that he took up to like 3,000 Indians he enslaved. Columbus alone. Columbus alone. But right here it says, listen, pay attention. He sent 500 Indians, prisoners, to be sold as slaves in Seville. Again, not Africans. Not Africans. A reverse middle passage. We got the drop. We got all the sources apart from Columbus. This is just one example. One person out of many hundreds of voyages. All right. Indians being enslaved, sold as slaves, where in Seville, in Spain. And what happens after they get sold in Spain? They become so-called Negroes. Some might even come back to the States and now they're Africans. That's the story. That's the tag they put on them. That's the hijack. Upon the arrival of these unhappy beings, Ferdinand gave orders for their sale in the markets of Andalusia, a Moorish town, But the gentler and more conscious Isabella caused those orders to be suspended until an ecclesiastical synod should determine whether this disposal of human beings was justifiable in the sight of the Creator. The divines on this occasion differed in opinion and gave oppugnant interpretations of the will of God. The queen, adopting the theory most consistent with her own disposition, commanded that the Indians should be restored to their native country, and that their countrymen should not be enslaved, but treated in future in the gentlest manner. But this decree came too late to benefit those who had been torn from their country. The change of condition, grief, and excessive labor had destroyed the greater part soon after their arrival. This act of Columbus, adds the historian, could not be justified. No injury comparable to it could be inflicted on the Indian people. The robberies and sensual excesses of the Spaniards might plead extenuation. But for this cruelty, the fruit of cold, calculating policy is the justification of one atrocity by another. His contemporaries, who have dignified with the name of conquest, the slaughter, and enslavement. All right, again, the conquest, the slaughter, and enslavement of the Aborigines of America. The enslavement, again, I'm going to repeat, the enslavement of the Aborigines of America, not Africans. Not Africans. Saw in those measures a wise policy. But modern historians have felt that they needed justification. History from Herrera, right? From Jose Herrera, the book he wrote, Munoz, in his History of the New World, has treated the subject with a degree of honorable feeling. He says, the tax was heavy and impolitic. Robertson and Irvin have defended them by reasons which set them in a more odious light, and in their closes have found an apology for deeds which, if placed naked before Columbus, he would have been ashamed to own. It is admitted, says the historian, that Columbus desired to make wealthy returns to Spain in order to sustain his credit and influence, but there was no apology for seeking this avowedly selfish object by imposing on a free and generous people the insupportable yoke of slavery. All right, remember, Columbus is a Portuguese Sephardic Jew, is a so-called black man, and his people are being expelled and going through things, because of the Inquisition, the Catholics, and now he's working for them. A lot of them started working for them, and now he's doing something worse to other people. To convert a terrestrial paradise into a prison. All right. This is Columbus, what? Insupportable joke of slavery to convert a terrestrial paradise into a prison, a terrestrial paradise. What? Again, what's the true Holy Land? What's the true terrestrial paradise right here in the Americas? This is Atlantis. This is the Hesperides. Terrestrial paradise into a prison. That's what they did, made vocal by the cries and groans of millions of beings to whom he brought the first idea of misery. Navarrete, Cura de la Palacios and Gordon's History, Volume 1, all right? Columbus repeatedly visited Spain, either to make propositions or obtain, if not redress, at least a hearing for those misrepresentations which Ovando, a man utterly devout of principle, had made. It was on his return to Haiti, on the coast of Spain, when himself a crew had suffered shipwreck, that the following illustrations of the character of the islanders was called forth. The admiral, finding his men deserting him, and the ship sinking on her side, and water leaving her, cast overboard such articles as could be most easily saved. He then proceeded with his crew to Nina, and dispatched a messenger to Huancangari, whose residence was half a mile distant, with news of the misfortune. The chief showed great sensibility upon the occasion, sending his people with large canoes to assist in unlanding and stripping the ship, whilst himself and his train took charge of the effects as they were landed. He used all means in his power to console the admiral and tendered to him all he possessed. The honesty and care of this guileless people were surprising. Everything before them had at least the attraction of novelty, and was of a nature to excite their cupidity, but not an article was stolen or lost. They never stole from them. Okay? The Indians didn't steal from Europeans. The admiral viewed this circumstance as providential, and enabling him to procure gold from the Indians, and of making a settlement in their country. All right? Columbus actually wanted Sarko, right? His real name. He wanted to retire and live the rest of his life in Costa Rica, where he landed on the Caribbean coast. That's what his plans were. We should have a video on that eventually. Says the chief invited the admiral to an entertainment, at which he displayed whatever his island contained most agreeable, giving the Spaniards as much reason to admire his delicacy as his hospitality. He ate in small quantities with great decorum, washing his hands and rubbing them with odoriferous herbs, and again after the repast, laving them with water. He was served with great deference by his subjects, towards whom his deportment was majestic and graceful. The shipwrecked mariners, charmed with the delicious abundance which the climate and soil produced, all right, listen, besought the admiral to permit them to remain on the island. They were like, wow, this place is beautiful. Can we stay here? He readily granted their request, founded on reasons which he had already weighed. He had others quite as cogent, among which the desire to discover the gold mine was not the least. Meanwhile, he continued to cultivate the friendship of Guancangari, all right, this is the chief and his tribe, and received daily from the affectionate prince valuable presents of gold. And so strong had the attachment of the latter become that he expressed an earnest wish to accompany the admiral to Castile. All right, you hear that? He went back with him to Spain, this chief, Guancangari. At one time, the present consisted of a large plate of gold, at another of a great golden mask, for which an earthen basin and ewer were begged. On certain occasion, the admiral dining on shore was received by the cacique and 5 subordinate chiefs, each bearing a golden crown, who conducted him to their council house and placed him upon the seat of honor on an elevated place or dais. Guancangari took the crown from his own head and put it on that of the admiral. You hear what's going on? The chief is giving him his crown. 2 of them then presented Columbus with a great plate of gold each. Wow. It ought not to be forgotten that in Columbus, this people believed that they beheld the predicted friends from another land, whom their tradition taught them to expect. Listen, this is why they were treating Columbus and all these people, conquistadors, so good, just like Moctezuma and, everywhere they went, they thought they were these gods and the legends. And, the Spanish and Columbus and all these people, they knew these legends and they pretended to be these people. They knew about it. He devoted several days in the beautiful and fertile province of Ornofe to repose and the recreation of his men, where he received new testimonials of that distinguished kindness which had already procured for the inhabitants of Cuba the character of the most gentle of the race. Whilst there he erected a cross, the symbol of possession, and celebrated a solemn mass. That's from Gordon's book. It was a custom where Columbus, observed his biographer, to erect in all remarkable places which he visited crosses and conspicuous situations to denote the discovery of the country and its subjection to the Romish faith. Romish-ish. He ordered a large cross, therefore, to be elevated on the banks of this river. This was done on Sunday morning with great ceremony and the celebration of Mass. You hear what's going on? He's setting up shop with their Christianity, and the most ironic part about all this is that most of these people were Sephardic Jews or Moors. They didn't even believe in that. They didn't even follow that themselves. When Columbus disembarked for this purpose, he was met upon the shore by the cacique and his principal favorite, a venerable Indian of 80 years of age, of grave and dignified deportment. The old man brought a calabash of a delicate kind of fruit, which he presented to the admiral in token of amity. Whilst Mass was preparing in this natural temple, the Indians looked on with awe and reverence, perceiving from the tones and gesticulations of the priests, the lighted tapers, and smoking incense, that it must be a ceremony of a sacred and mysterious nature. When the service was ended, the aged man approached to Columbus and made him this oration. "That which thou hast been doing," said he, "is well, for it appears to be thy manner of giving thanks. I am told that thou hast lately come to these lands with a mighty force, and hast subdued many countries, spreading great terror among the people. But be not therefore vain glorious. Know that according to our belief, the souls of man have 2 journeys before them when they are parted. from the body, one to a place dismal and foul and covered with darkness, prepared for those who have been unjust and cruel to their fellow men, the other pleasant and full of delight, for such as have promoted peace on earth. If thou art mortal, and dost expect to die, and dost believe that each shall be rewarded according to his deeds, beware that thou wrongfully hurt no one, nor do harm to those who have done no harm to thee. Right? That's supposedly what the Indians are telling the Spaniard, right? Columbus. C. Clavijero and Irvin's Life of Columbus. That's the sources, right? Margaret, to whom Columbus entrusted the exploration of Ciboa, contented himself with sending Ojeda to the fortress of St. Thomas, while he took his own position in the rich plain of La Vega. There he abandoned himself and followers to the grossest sensualities, and regardless of justice and decorum, seized upon the provisions, gold, and female relatives of the confiding tribe. You hear what's going on with this guy over there? Yeah, doing bad stuff to the women, the indigenous women. They robbed the inhabitants of whatever they deemed valuable and made their wives and daughters the victims of their licentious passions. Wow, man, so cruel. The son of Columbus remonstrated, but he, being a favorite at court, treated his reproof with contumely defiance. Father Boyle, too, whose fanatism and clerical love of power were rebuked and controlled by the more liberal and prudent genius of the admiral, became an active member of this faction. Huh. He joined in too. Gentle as the Indians were, their indignation at the occupation of their country and the erection of the fort of St. Thomas at length became apparent. All right. We're just talking about, hey, literally Deuteronomy 28. All right. It says here, Kawanaba anxiously watched for an opportunity of avenging the wrongs of his tribe and of deliverance from a curb which his noble spirit disdained. The prince, confiding in his courage and the fastnesses of his mountains, preserved his warlike attitude, impeding the workings of the mines and menacing the safety of the colony. Whilst Columbus pondered on the means to propitiate or subdue this chief, Ojeda undertook to bring him to Isabella as a friend or captive. At the head of 10 chosen followers, well armed and mounted, he made his way. He approached the chief with great respect, assuring him that he came on a friendly visit from the admiral, who had sent him an invaluable present. The Indian prince received Ojeda with that frankness and confidence which belonged to elevated minds. He endeavored to prevail on him to repair to Isabella to treat with Columbus. Caonaba at length consented, but did not place himself at the mercy of his enemies. To the surprise of Ojeda, he set out with a numerous train, and to a remonstrance from him replied that it was unbefitting a great prince to go forth scantily attended. The cavalier had now cause to dread that his wiles would be turned against himself, to prevent which he had recourse to a singular stratagem. He exhibited a set of manacles highly polished, which he said had been made in the Touré paradise, that they were worn by Castilian monarchs on rare occasions and were intended as a present for the cacique. He proposed to decorate him with these ornaments and mounted on the same horse with Ojeda, that he should return with them to his subjects, secure against treachery, and he supposed he readily consented. At length, availing himself of a favorable moment, Ojeda dashed into the forest, went out of sight of the natives, and with the assistance of his followers, bound the cacique to himself, directing his flight toward Isabella. So he tricked them into saying, hey, come with us, it's all good, it's all peace, we'll treat you good. As soon as he was away from the tribe, they bound him. They tied him up. All right, now you're a prisoner. All right, you hear what's going on with the chief Caonaba? What happened to him? It says, in captivity, Caonaba preserved his lofty air and spirit. He met the admiral, with a haughty glance, vaunted his success at La Navidad and his intention to subject Isabella to a like fate, whilst all others approached Columbus with the respect due to his station, which she rigorously exacted. The chief refused him every tribute of superiority. The chief was like, I don't care who you are, man. I ain't bowing to you or saying hi to you, giving you no respect. He was detained a prisoner till the return of Columbus from Spain, having accompanied him upon the voyage, but he died before its termination. Wow. So he died on the way back. He almost made it back on Columbus' second voyage, but look, he died on the way, man. Right? Middle passage here, right? Says his biographer, the victim of the morbid sensibilities of an unyielding spirit. Herrera says, although one brother of Caonaba had fallen into the hands of the Spaniards in an attempt at reprisal, another called Manicao Pax, as warlike as himself, prepared to liberate or avenge him by his own influence and that of Anacoana, the widow of Caonaba. All right, remember her, guys? Like we got a video on Anacoana. We're gonna get that for the dismount. All right, who possessed great power over the mind of her brother Bohecho. The flame of war rekindled throughout the island. The Spanish army did not exceed 200 foot and 20 horse, but to these must be added 20 bloodhounds more terrible to the Indians than horse or men. The naked islanders, assailed in every direction by the thunder and lightning of the firearms, borne down and trampled underfoot by the horse and his rider, seized by the bloodhound, who pulled them to the ground and dashed his fangs instantly into the bowels of his victims, fled in the utmost confusion and dismay. All right, see what's going on? They're overpowering, unfortunately, the Indians, and they're sending their bloodhounds. Remember, I got a video about the dogs, the Spanish dogs, what they brought. They were, sending the dogs after the Indians. They were murdering, mutilating babies, kids. Big bloodhounds, right? On his return from Spain, Columbus was greatly chagrined to find the colony a prey to disease and insubordination. It is to be noted that the criminals of the Spanish prisons had been disgorged upon the afflicted inhabitants of the New World. All right, what are they talking about? They sent a bunch of convicts over here. These were the people on the ship. These were convicts, a lot of them. They were convicts. They sent the people from the Spanish prisons onto the people of the New World, so-called New World. During the absence of the admiral and the administration of his brother, Anacoana advised her brother Bohecho to take warning by the fate of her unfortunate husband and conciliate a power which they had not the means to resist. This recommendation procured for the Alentedo, on his visit to this district, a friendly and courteous reception. 30 maidens of the royal household came forth to meet him, dancing and singing their traditional aretos and waving branches of the palm tree, like those of the olive. Emblems of peace, which they gracefully presented to him on their knee. Wow. On a visit subsequently made to collect the tribute, he was received by Anacoana with hospitality. She, on that occasion, distinguished herself as well by her liberality and compliances as by her talent and politeness. She entertained him and his retinue at a large house, furnished with abundance of seats, plates, towels, and various vessels. All right, you hear that? She got everything, made of hard black wood, highly polished and curiously carved in bas relief, with the figures of men, animals, and things of grotesque shape. Her munificence was emulated by her brother, who gave a large quantity of provision beyond the stipulated tribute. Certain tender mercies of the church were considered perfidious and cruel outrages by Guarionex, the cacique of Vega, and his subjects, which induced him to make another effort to throw off the Spanish yoke. But his designs were betrayed, and he with subordinate leaders were seized in their villages. All right, these guys were against the Spanish, this cacique Guarionex. 2 of the bravest of the latter were put to death, but Guarionex was spared. in consideration of the wrongs he had received. Several traits of character, says his historian, were developed during this campaign which, in justice to a much cal- calumniated race, we shall succinctly notice. The Alentedo sent messengers to Mayo Panax, promising friendship and protection on resigning his guest, but extreme vengeance in case of refusal. The magnanimous reply of the cacique was, "Tell the Spaniards that they are bad men, cruel and tyrannical usurpers of the territory of others, and shedders of innocent blood. I desire not their friendship. Guarionex is a good man, my friend, my guest. He has fled to me for refuge. I have promised to protect him, and shall keep my promise, all right? He ain't giving up his boy, right? He's going down with him. You see what's going on, right? All this history gets left out, all these important people, all these unsung heroes, right? Future episodes. Nor did he change his determination on a second application, nor the entreaties of those he tenderly loved, who amid the smoking ruins of their villages urged the surrender of the fugitive as the only means of saving their people. Among the prisoners taken with Mayobana was his sister, the wife of a cacique, whose territories had not yet been visited by the Spaniards. She was reputed one of the most beautiful women of the island. Man, devotedly attached to her brother, she had abandoned the security of her own territory to follow him in his painful wanderings while hiding from his relentless foes. When her husband learned her captivity, he hastened to the Alentedo and, swayed by an ardent and generous affection, ransomed her by submitting himself and his possessions to the Spanish dominion. Wow, you see that? The guy gave up the whole kingdom just to get his wife back. Wow, now that's love. But wow, that's some Matrix stuff, right? Is it Trinity or the rest of the world, right? Which one you choosing? The civil yoke, intolerably heavy, was not the only burden imposed on the Indians. The ministers of religion in that bigoted age would have the mind of the Indian a subject to their will, as his person and property were to the Spanish magistrates. All right. Talking to people of the island of Haiti, okay? Father Boyle had left two priests at least who were zealous of the church. Roman Payne, a poor hermit, as he styled himself, of the order of Saint Jeronimos, and John Borognon, a Franciscan. The success of these pious men was not commensurate with their zeal, and they had frequent occasion to lament that their catechumens required force and punishment to keep them in the prescribed way. Guarionex listened attentively to their teachings and complacently repeated the prayers they dictated. But unfortunately, their assurance of the purity and excellence of their faith were not sustained by the professors of it, and the savage conceived that the seduction or violation of his wife was evidence of the falsity or insufficiency of their rules of faith, justice, and self denial. Indignant at this outrage, and goaded on by the scoffs of his countrymen for adopting the faith of murderers and oppressors, all right, he renounced a religion which he supposed tolerated such crimes. The priest, stricken with horror at his apostasy, retired from his territory, leaving a chapel with some pictures to which they directed the converts, now reduced to a single family, to offer up their prayers. The holy figures were removed and buried by order of Guarionex. A crime so enormous was immediately reported to the Alentedo, whose justice accorded to the criminal Haytians, six in number, a former trial, in which they were convicted of sacrilege. All right, listen what's going on. They're trying to force Christianity on these people, they ain't having it. And the lieutenant of the viceroy of the most Catholic king piously burned them at the stake. All right, you hear what's going on? What happened? They got burned at the stake because they didn't want to accept Christianity. This first auto de fe was sealed with divine approbation, since we are assured by Father Roman Payne certain roots which grew where the pictures had been burned assumed the form of the cross. Oh my God, that's how they said, hey, it's okay. It was just, we got a sign. We got a sign. It's okay. Wow. Anacoana, who on the death of her brother governed the province, was no longer the friends of the whites. All right, they killed her brother. The miseries of her people had converted her love into deep and inextinguishable hatred. Resistance in her dominion to cruel and rapacious exactions was magnified into rebellion, and she was accused of attempting to subvert the Spanish power. Ovando gave ready faith to these accusations and marched into Saragua with 300 foot and 70 horse, on the pretense of paying a friendly visit to the queen and making satisfactory arrangements for paying the tribute. He was received by Anacoana at the head of her tributary caciques and a numerous train of her subjects. The governor advanced and gave the preconcerted signal by placing his hand on the cross of Alcantara, that pledge of boundless mercy which hung at his breast. Instantly the charge was given. The caciques, then assembled in the house of the queen, were made prisoners and subjected to horrible tortures. Oh man, in order to compel them to accuse themselves and her of treason. Thus convicted, they were bound to the pillars of her house, to which fire was set. You hear what's going on, what they did to the American Indians in the island of Haiti, in the Hispaniola, and perished miserably in the flames. Meanwhile, an undistinguished massacre was committed on the populace. A massacre was committed on the populace from which no age nor condition was exempted. All right, Deuteronomy 28. The catastrophe of this act of Spanish justice was in accordance with its commencement. The lovely, the high minded, the generous Anacoana was born in chains to San Domingo, tried by a court of civilized Spaniards, the most gallant, chivalrous people in Europe, condemned on extorted evidence, and hanged in the presence of those on whom she had bestowed 1,000 kindnesses. All right? Man, that's why we cannot forget Anacoana and what her people went through. This is why these type of videos are very important. Just going over the info again. The people she had bestowed thousands of kindness on her ended up burning her on the stake, okay? In commemoration of his triumph, Ovando founded the town of Santa Maria de la Verdadera Paz. They call it the True Peace, huh? Verdadera Paz, the town where they burned her. Holy Mary of the True Peace, huh? But his conduct toward the Indians, especially of Sarah, like the son of Judah, filled Isabella with horror and indignation. She received the intelligence whilst languishing on her deathbed and exacted from Ferdinand a promise that he would recall Ovando from the government. But the rich returns which that officer made delayed the fulfillment of this promise for more than 4 years, and then his removal was induced by other causes. Herrera Oviedo, the repeated description of cruelties, continues the historian, is not a pleasant task, but the justice of history should not relieve the Spanish nation from the penalties of her crimes. For real. What's up with that? Where's the reparations, huh? At this time, there was a regular form of ecclesiastical government, the Pope having granted authority for erecting bishoprics, deaneries, parishes, and other spiritual divisions under the patronage of the King of Spain, and with a tact rarely pertaining to a devoted son of the Church. Ovando circumscribed the papal power in his new possessions by reserving to the crown the right to dispose of all benefices in America, stipulating also that no papal mandate should be promulgated there until it had been approved by his council. Haitis were established for the support of the clergy, and adequate means were given for the erection of churches, and to prevent the inroads of heresy, the Inquisition extended here to its terrible powers. All right. The distance from Hispaniola to Cuba was only 18 leagues. Many of the distressed natives of the former had escaped thither. All right, a lot of people had gone to Cuba from Hispaniola, escaped. Among these was Cacique Hatuey. All right, we're about to get, I think, Hatuey's story. All right, another one, man. This is like, it's sad to hear these stories, but we have to remember and honor these people and what really happened here. who had raised himself, all right? Talking about Cacique Hatuey, who had raised himself to a distinguished rank in his adopted country, which he prepared to defend against the invaders. He's talking about Cuba. He was coming from Hispaniola. He assembled his people. He was probably from the island of Haiti, the part of Haiti. He assembled his people, reminded them of the sufferings which the Spaniards had inflicted upon them, declaring that their crimes were the tribute which they rendered to the God whom they worshipped. They come hither only to seek and to find him. Let us not keep him among us, but cast him into the sea. For should we hide him in the bowels of the earth where he had his origin? All right, the devil, huh? The Spaniards would drag him thence. At the conclusion of this speech, the Indians commenced a religious song and dance, all right, which they closed by casting the piece of gold into the sea, Herrera. But this mystical devotion to their invader's god did not avert the approach of the Christians. Hatuey boldly met Velasquez on the shore and strove in vain to drive him back to the ship. After maintaining a desultory warfare for some months, all right, it wasn't easy to get at him. For some months, he was made prisoner. And Velasquez, considering him as a slave who had fled from labor and taken arms against his master, condemned him to be burned to death. Wow, right? Remember, we got a video on him. Another unsung hero we're going to have to go over. When at the stake, Franciscan friar, listen to what happened when he was getting burned. Remember the story, right? When at the stake, pay attention to this part. When he was getting burned at the stake, we're talking about Chief Hatuey, Cacique Hatuey in Cuba, right? It says a Franciscan friar laboring to convert him, right? Promised him immediate admission to the joys of heaven, right? So while he's being burned alive, because he's going to die anyways, or he's telling him, hey, listen, if you convert, I promise you're going to go right to heaven if he would just embrace the Catholic faith. And listen to what Hatuey said to him, all right? This is a real G right here. This is a real one right here. All right, honor to Hatuey. And so Hatuey said, are there any Spaniards in that happy place of which you speak of, right? He's like, is there any Spaniards up there in heaven? He's like, yes, replied the monk, but only such as are worthy and good. The best of them, returned an indignant chief, have neither worth nor goodness. I will not go to the place where I may meet one of the accursed race. All right. He said, if there's Christians up there and Spaniards, I'm good. You guys are an accursed race. You guys are evil. If that's heaven, then I'm good. I don't need to. I'm not converting before that. He's like, yeah, while he's burning, guys, while he's burning alive, the king created a new office called Repartidor los Indios. By a census, it appeared that the number of the Indians in Haiti, which in 1508 had amounted to 60,000, had been reduced to 14,000. These were divided into lots and sold to the highest bidder. Again, sold into slavery, sold, not Africans, a method of distribution which cruelly broke the ties of affection and vicinage, and added greatly to the sufferings of this devoted race, whilst the heavier burdens and more intolerable labors imposed by new masters completed its misery and hastened its extension. The dominions condemned the repartimientos as contrary to natural justice, the precepts of Christianity, and sound policy. They were most vehement in testifying against them. In the year 1511, Montesino, one of the most eminent preachers, inveighed against this practice in the great church of San Domingo. Don Diego Columbus, the principal officers of the colony, and the laymen who had been his hearers complained of the monk to his superiors, but they, instead of condemning, applaud his doctrine, as alike servable to God and the king. The Franciscans took part with the laity to defend the repartimientos, but as they could not with decency give their avowed approbation to a system of oppression so repugnant to the spirit of religion, they endeavored to palliate what they could not justify. All right. So these repartimientos again is when they split, they made laws, they made plantations, they put the Indians into slavery. Encomiendas, repartimientos, all right, this is what they did in the Spanish colonies. right? It's slavery. That's why they're calling it repugnant to the spirit of religion, all right? A system of oppression, slavery. This opposition, so far from inducing the Dominicans to relax in their measures, incited them to take a more lofty position. They declared the slavery of the Indians a grievous sin and refused to absolve or admit to the sacrament such of their countrymen as continued to hold the natives in servitude. Both parties applied to the king and sent deputies to support their respective opinions. Ferdinand referred this important subject to a committee of his privy council, assisted by the most eminent civilians and divines of Spain. After a long discussion, the speculative point in controversy was determined in favor of the Dominicans. The Indians were declared a free people and entitled to all the natural rights of men. Notwithstanding this decision, the repartimientos were not discontinued. At length, Ferdinand issued a decree of his privy council, declaring that after mature consideration, the apostolic bull and other titles by which the crown of Castile claimed its possessions in the New World, the servitude of Indians was warranted by the laws both of God and man, all right? So they didn't really last that whole, oh, we're going to free them. No. Nah, actually, come again, they're actually our servants, yeah, Indians, by the laws of God and man, their God, right? That unless they were subjected to the dominions of the Spaniards and compelled to reside under their inspection, it would be impossible to reclaim them from idolatry, or to instruct them in the holy Catholic faith, that no further scruples should be entertained about the repartimientos, as the king and council were willing to take the charge of that upon their own consciences, and that the Dominicans and monks of other religious orders should abstain from those invectives which, by the excess of charitable but ill-informed zeal, they had uttered against the practice. The true reason of this decree will be found in the fact that the Bishop of Fonseca, the principal director of American affairs, had 800 Indians as his property. All right? This one guy had just 800 Indians as slaves, his property, slaves, guys, not Africans. Listen, pay attention. They never really brought Africans. Wake up, catch up on the videos. We've been here 8 years trying to show you that. The commander Lope de Conchillos, his chief associate, had also considerable numbers in the island of Hispaniola, Puerto Rico, Cuba, and Jamaica. Herrera, all right, that's from the Herrera book, says the inhuman measures of Albuquerque revived the zeal of the Dominicans and called forth an advocate for the afflicted Indians who possessed the courage, talents, and activity requisite to support a desperate cause. Bartholomew Las Casas accepted an allotment of Indians, but surrendered all that fell to his share, declaring that he should ever bewail his misfortunes and guilt in having exercised, even for a moment, this impious dominion over his fellow creatures. All right, he was given slaves because he was, that was part of one of his pay, like to receive servants while he was in the Americas, right? Bartholomew, and he's like, nah, he freed them all. He just let them go. He like, you know, from that time, he became the avowed patron of the Indians, and by his and by his manly interposition in their behalf and the respect imposed by his abilities and character, he succeeded in setting some bounds to the excesses of the Spaniards. He determined to proceed to Spain, having the most sanguine hopes of opening the eyes and softening the heart of the king by that picture of the oppression of his subjects which he would exhibit to his view. Who is the king, huh? He represented to the monarch, whom he found in a declining state, all the fatal effects of the repartimientos, boldly charging him with the guilt of this impious measure, which had brought misery and destruction upon a numerous and innocent race of men, whom Providence had placed under his protection. Ferdinand, whose mind and body were enfeebled by disease, was alarmed at the charge of impiety. He listened with deep compunction and promised seriously to consider the means of redressing the evil, but death prevented him from executing his resolution. All right, he died before he can help, huh? Oh, what luck, huh? He wasn't gonna help. The regent of Castile sent 3 monks of the order of Saint Jerome, together with a lawyer of probity, empowered to regulate all judicial proceedings. Las Casas was appointed to accompany them with the title of Protector of the Indians. Immediately on their arrival, the superintendents began to exercise their power. The first act was the liberation of all Indians who had been granted to persons not residing in America. They, fearful of taking any imprudent step, deemed it necessary to tolerate the repartimientos and to suffer the Indians to remain under subjection to their Spanish masters. They, however, endeavored to moderate the evils of this policy. Las Casas was dissatisfied. The enslavement of the Indians, again, the enslavement of the Indians, not Africans, was avowedly unrighteous and a violation of the soundest, clearest principles of natural justice and human rights, and productive of a mass of misery which nothing but the grossest avarice would dare to weigh against the molten gold. He therefore justly regarded the sacrifice of these principles as an unhallowed and timid policy, and as protector of the Indians, he expressed his opinion with zeal, perhaps with intemperance, and boldly demanded that the superintendents should not bereave the natives of the common rights of mankind. They received his most impassioned remonstrances without emotion, and pertinaciously adhered to their own system. But the colonists did not bear with him so patiently. They threatened violence to his person, and he found it necessary to seek shelter in a convent. Perceiving his efforts in America to be fruitless, he returned to Europe with a fixed resolution to not to abandon a people so cruelly oppressed. On his return to Spain, Las Casas applied to the new ministers with assiduity and address, and in despite of Father Monsanero, whom the colonists sent to Spain to resist his appeal, his exertions to obtain a reconsideration of the measures relating to the Indians were successful. The fathers of St. Jerome were called together with their associate Suago. Sir Francis Drake, who landed at Haiti in 1585, states that the Spaniards had then utterly exterminated the ancient race. Oh man. Or enslaved, right? Not enslaved. Enslaved, sold out. The means by which this astonishing destruction was effected are summed up with honest indignation by Dr. Edwards. The Spaniards distributed them into lots, all right, enslaved, and compelled them to dig in the mines without rest or intermission until death. A lot of them died, yes. Their only refuge put a period to their sufferings, such as attempted resistance or escape. The merciless tyrants hunted down with dogs which were fed on their flesh, all right? Just like the stories of so-called blacks escaping slavery, right? Same thing. They disregarded sex and age, and with impious and frantic rage and bigotry, even called in religion to sanction their cruelties. Some more zealous than the rest forced their miserable captives into the water, and after administering the rite of baptism, cut their throats. Wow. You guys hear that? Oh, they thought they were going to help them. No, they just wanted them to baptize, convert before they killed them. How do you baptize somebody and then murder them? Think how crazy you have to be. Think of that. That's so crazy. The next moment, to prevent their apostasy, others made a vow to hang or burn 13 every morning in honor of the Savior and his apostles. Listen, to what? To hang. Who they hanging, huh? Or burn 13 people a day. Listen, they were doing this, guys. Deuteronomy 28. Nor were these excesses only the result of fanatism, which existing our abhorrence also excites our pity. All right? We're talking about a Holocaust, right? That never gets talked about. And no reparations in any form. The Spaniards were actuated in many instances by such wantonness of malice as is wholly unexampled in the wide history of human depravity. All right? Nothing like this. Wholly unexampled in the wide history of human depravity. That's why they created the fake one. To get our minds of what really happened and to whom. Deuteronomy 28 for real. Martyr relates that it was a frequent practice among them to murder the Indians of Hispaniola in sport and merely to keep their hands in use. They had an emulation which of them could most dexterously strike off the head of a man at a blow. Listen, and wages frequently depended on this hellish exercise to fill up the measure of their iniquity and demonstrate to the world that the nation at large participated in the guilt of individuals. The court of Spain not only neglected to punish these enormities in its subjects, but when rapacity and avarice had nearly defeated their own purposes by the extirpation of the natives of Hispaniola, the king gave permission to seize perfidiously on the unsuspecting inhabitants of the neighboring islands and transport them to perish in the mines of San Domingo. All right, this is what's going on. Doomed to intolerable labor, extorted by the lash, if they fled from their hated toil, they were hunted like wild beasts, and when taken, cruelly scourged and laden with chains. All right, this was happening to Indians, not Africans. And when taken, many perished of famine in the forest and mountains. Thousands died under their labors before their stipulated time had expired, their indenture. The survivors were put forth to return to their homes without the means of subsistence, exhausted by toil and hunger, many sunk by the way. I have found, says Casas, dead in the road, others gasping under the trees, and others in the pangs of death, faintly calling for food. Those who reached their homes commonly found them desolate. During their long absence, their wives and children had perished or wandered away. Their fields were overgrown with weeds, and their only consolation was the hope of a speedy death at the threshold of their once happy dwellings. Self-destruction rescued many from insupportable tyranny, and mothers, for very love of their children, deprived them of the life they had given. All right? Parents killing their own children because they didn't want them to go through the cruelties and torture they were experiencing. Haiti, at the time of its discovery, contained 1 million of inhabitants, but according to Peter Martyr, who wrote on the authority of Columbus, 1,200,000. Yet 12 years had not elapsed when this population, so lately endowed with peace, plenty, and ease, was reduced to 1/6 of its original number, and that remnant was steeped in the depths of misery. Martyr. All right, he wrote that. The inhabitants of the province of Hatuey had a peculiarly warlike character. Their chief, Cotubanama, was remarkable for his size, strength, and courage. Las Casas says he was the tallest and strongest of his tribe, and more perfectly formed than one of 1,000 of any nation, whatever, that he had a yard in breadth, one shoulder to shoulder, and finely proportioned. One of his subordinate chiefs having been torn to pieces by a dog set on him by a Spaniard, his people in requital slew 8 Europeans in the adjacent island of Saona. To punish this offense, Ovando dispatched Juan de Esquivel at the head of 400 men. Cotubanama, prepared for the conflict and justly distrustful of the sincerity of the Spaniards, refused all overtures of accommodation. The vast superiority of the armed Spaniards necessarily prevailed, and the Indians were driven to the mountains and forests, hunted like beasts of prey, and when taken indiscriminately slaughtered. The island of Saona was desolate. The inhabitants made a desperate defense, and when overcome, sought a vain refuge in the caverns. 600 prisoners were deliberately massacred, and those who were spared were made slaves. Those who were spared were what? Made slaves. Who? American Indians from Haiti. Peace at length granted at the prayer of Cotubanama, on condition that he would pay a large tribute of bread and permit a fortress to be erected in his dominions. But the exactions of the Spaniards were not to be controlled by any stipulated treaty. When the stipulated grain was delivered, the Indians were required to transport it to San Domingo. The troops of the garrison behaved with their usual licentiousness, violently seizing the wives and daughters of the Indians, and at length were sacrificed to the vengeance of their relatives. Indian prisoners were compelled by torture to tell their retreats, and when these places of refuge were discovered, the fugitives, frequently aged and infirm, women and children, were slaughtered without mercy, all right? They had places of refuge like the Israelites, and even there, they got slaughtered. Some of the prisoners had their hands cut off and were sent to deliver them as letters demanding their surrender. Wow, you hear that? Numberless were those thus maimed. Others were hung on gibbets with their feet touching the ground, that they might die a protracted death. Wow, they're evil. 13 were religiously hanged in honor of Christ and his disciples, all right, every day, remember? Whilst thus suspended and living, their merciless executioners hewed them with their swords to prove the strength of their arms and the edge of their weapons, and wrapping them in dry straw, destroyed them in fiercest agony. That's what they were doing, torturing them while they were dying. The cacique Cotabanama sought refuge amid the rocks and forests of Saona, but he was captured after a severe struggle with an athletic soldier. The captors of the chief proposed to broil him to death, but abandoned their fiendish design that his fate might be decided by Ovando himself. The governor, who felt not that regard for his captive which the brave feel for the brave, sentenced him to be hanged. The religion of that age, adds the historian, taught to believe that all means were lawful to make Christians, that reducing the heathen to slavery was a means of conversion as mild as it was profitable. You guys hear that? Who? The Indians into slavery. Gordon's History, Volume 1. The people of Spain, were no longer eager to rush to the New World. Neither ships nor men could be procured without difficulty. At the instance of Columbus, the sentence of criminals condemned to galleys was commuted to the transportation to the colonies to labor there in the public service, all right? Convicts to labor in the plantations, just like slaves, right? Europeans, not Africans, and American Indians, right? And a general pardon was proclaimed to all malefactors who should embark for Hispaniola. They even got a pardon if they go work in Hispaniola. By these wretched expedients, the admiral sowed the seeds of many sorrows to the already oppressed natives. Ovando had been appointed to succeed Bobadilla, who was recalled for his surpassing cruelties in the New World. Wow. He had encouraged the wildest excesses and enforced the merciless partition of the people among his adherents, thus sustained the convicts from the dungeons of Castile became the most wanton and savage tyrants. They drove the wretched Indians in crowds to the mountains to labor in the mines without mercy or discretion. They reduced the wives and daughters of the princes of the country to the condition of domestic servants, subject to the most horrid indignities. They enforced the attendance of a large train of servants and were borne on the shoulders of some, whilst others with umbrellas of palm leaves were obliged to protect them from the scorching beams of the sun or cool them with fans of party-colored feathers. They addressed the Indians in the most degrading terms, and on the slightest pretense or freak of ill humor, inflicted blows and death itself. All right, who they doing all this to? American Indians, not Africans. The rapid annihilation of the Indian people, depriving their colonists of their accustomed instruments of labor, Ovando suggested a remedy, which was to transport the inhabitants of the Lucayan Islands to Hispaniola. All right, and remember the whole history with the Lucayan Islands in the previous videos and everything, and how they are described. Very dark, very swarthy. The natives of these islands, it was said, would be easily civilized and instructed in religion if united to the Spanish colony and placed under the eye of missionaries. The king could not be deceived as to the real motive of the proposal, yet he readily gave his consent. Vessels were accordingly fitted out for the Lucayans, whose commanders, now acquainted with the Indian language, informed the natives that they came from that delightful land in which their ancestors dwelt, for the purpose of carrying them thither. This is what they told them. We're going to bring you to paradise. They thought they were like gods. Listen, they're tricking them to participate with them in scenes of never ending blessedness. Rejoicing in the prospect of partaking in the happy state of their forefathers, they followed the Spaniards with alacrity. More than 4,000 were thus betrayed into the miseries which overwhelmed the natives of Haiti. Remember, we got this story, over 4,000 enslaved, brought to Hispaniola, and the remaining brought to where? Margarita Island in South America to die for pearls, remember? My pearl videos and all that? And then some of those people ended up in Barbados as the first so-called slaves, the Indian and the Negro. I remember this is the same story. Again, more than 4,000 were thus betrayed into the miseries which overwhelmed the natives of Haiti, whilst their betrayers glorified themselves in the simplicity of their victims. All right, this is all written, two different sources here. Peter Martyr of the afflicted Lucayans observes, many of them, in the anguish of despair, obstinately refused all manner of subsistence, and retiring to desert caves and unfrequented woods, silently gave up the ghost. Others repairing to the seacoast on the southern side of Hispaniola, cast many longing looks towards that part of the ocean where they suppose their own islands to be situated, and as the sea breeze rises, they eagerly inhale it, fondly believing that it has lately visited their own happy shores and valleys, and comes fraught with the breath of those they love, their wives, parents, and children. With this idea, they continue for hours on the coast until nature becomes utterly exhausted, when stretching forth their arms toward the ocean as if to take a last embrace of their distant country and relations, they sink down and expire without a struggle. Irving's Life of Columbus. All right, this is from journals, primary sources. They're writing what's really going on at that time. The Indians, see, this in despair, the Lucayans remembering their land, they're as slaves now in Hispaniola in Haiti, right? It was certainly not a work like Dr. Sepulveda's in the justification of slavery, but a decree of Charles V. All right, Charles V, another so-called black man, Charles V, who had taken the advice of all the learned in the land and consulted the Spanish universities, whose fame and theology was in that age great, and that doomed the inhabitants of the islands and continent of America to slavery. All right, the inhabitants, listen, who? Not Africans. Who? Inhabitants of the islands and continent of America to slavery. Americans, the inhabitants, slavery. They had local labor, local force for slavery. They didn't have to go to Africa. Wake up. This decree was sanctioned by the Council of the Indies, and a more solemn act could not have emanated from higher constituted authorities. If it was reversed many years afterwards, this was in consequence of the evils which followed, but it was no condemnation of a conceded point in divinity and law. Those who may wish to learn more of the opinion of the 15th and 16th centuries on slavery may consult the writings of Las Casas and of Dr. Sepulveda, whose work has been termed by later authors a bloody book. But Las Casas' pathetic narration entitled The Destruction of the Indians, by which he endeavors to excite compassion of the sovereign toward his Indian subjects, deserves still more that appellation, since every page describes some new scene of bloodshed and slaughter. Whole provinces are there represented as depopulated for the sake of working the mines. You're right. Whole provinces, all of Indians, right, turn into slaves to work the mines, right? Thousands are caused to perish. While pearl fisheries, right, diving for pearls, who? The Indians, right, and the sugar plantations swept away the scanty remains of the Indian population. Swept away the remains, huh? Now they've been reclassified. Now they're so-called Negroes, so-called Africans, right? Sugar plantations swept away the scanty remains of the Indian population. It is then to be imputed to Las Casas as a crime his pitying the Indian whom a long residence among them had taught to consider them as his children, when he beheld them sinking under their burdens. Antiquities of Mexico, Volume 6. Las Casas has by the oppressors of the Indians been called a fanatic. His fanatism was merely an ardent desire to oppose the dignity of his sacerdotal character and acknowledge talents, learning, and the mildness of age to brutal oppression and injustice. Did they not, says Las Casas, receive the Spaniards who first came among them with gentleness and humanity? Did they not show more joy in proportion and lavishing treasures upon them than the Spaniards were greedy in receiving them? But our covetousness was not yet satisfied. Though they gave up to us their riches and their lands, we would also take from them their wives and children and liberty. I take God to witness of this and all the hierarchies and thrones of angels, and the saints of the heavenly court, and all men living. I also discharge my conscience by declaring that if His Majesty should grant the repartimientos to the Spaniards, the Indies in a short time will be a desert like Hispaniola. Wow, what did they do to Hispaniola? Las Casas charged his countrymen with having massacred about 40 million in less than 50 years, all right, or enslaved and then reclassified, right? He enumerates millions slaughtered in Honduras, Venezuela, Peru, Mexico, Hispaniola, 60,000 in Jamaica, while new reinforcements were abducted from the provinces and islands, right? And they were replacing the workforce with other Indians. Literally, that's what they're telling you here, right? Come on now. Columbus and his crew were welcomed by the Lucayans with a kindness truly patriarchal, but scarcely had 20 years elapsed before their anti-Christian invaders transported them by force or by artists to the mines of Hispaniola. They survived but a few years under the dominion of their oppressors, all right? This is from primary sources. The instructions given to Ojeda were of the most extraordinary character, and as they contain a formal exposition of the Spanish right to the possession of the islands and continent of America, certainly merit our attention. The commander was required as servant of the king of Castile and Leon, the conquerors of barbarous nations, to declare to the Indians that God, one and eternal, had created the heavens and the earth, and one man and woman from whom they all were descended. But as during the long period of more than 5,000 years the human race had, because one country could not contain them, scattered over the face of the globe, God had given absolute authority over the whole to one man named Saint Peter, and to bear the name of Pope, which signifies Great Father, and that his power had been continued to his successors, and would be continued to the end of the world, and that one of those popes had granted to the Catholic King Ferdinand and his Queen Isabella and their successors all the islands and continents of the ocean sea, as was fully expressed in certain deeds, which he would exhibit if requested, that most of the islands were his title, had been declared, had recognized it, and had obeyed the religious men sent by the king to instruct the inhabitants of this holy faith, who having become Christians were received under his most gracious protection and were treated as his other subjects and vassals. The commissioners were also instructed to proclaim to the nation of terra firma that they were bound to like obedience, and that if after due reflection they acknowledged the supremacy of the Church, the Pope in his own right, and His Majesty by his appointment as the sovereign Lord of all these countries, and consent to receive the holy doctrines of the Church, His Majesty would extend to them his love, and would leave their wives and children free from servitude, and themselves in the enjoyment of all they possessed in the same manner as he had done to the inhabitants of the islands. All right, this is what they're telling the Indians, right? If you do this, if you do that, and we're supposed to do this because we are the rulers of the world and the Pope is the master and all that. This is what they're telling the Indians, right? Continues, says, but that in case of refusal or malicious delay to obey these injunctions, he would enter their country with the horrors of war. So they're saying, if you don't listen to what we're telling you to do, this is what's going to happen to you. We're going to enter your country with the horrors of war, subject the inhabitants to the yoke of the church and the crown, carrying them and their wives and children into slavery, again, into slavery who American Indians, not Africans, and do them all possible mischief as rebellious subjects, and that all the bloodshed and calamities which might follow should be imputed, not to his majesty or his agents, but to their own disobedience. The terms of the papal bull, right? That's what they've been talking about. The papal bull. We got the drop already, right? Giving them the right to go invade and conquer and take over the principalities, the kingdoms, and everything in the Americas, and turn all anybody who's declared an enemy of Christ into perpetual servitude, slavery. All right. So the terms of the papal bull are out of our mere liberality and certain science and from the fullness of our apostolic power by the authority of Almighty God to us given through Saint Peter. We give, grant, and assign. All right, that's Papal Bull. Shall we admire most the justice of this manifesto, the strength of the title which it sets forth, or the grave adherence to municipal form which attended its proclamation? Had they understood the nature of the subjection demanded of them, they must have considered the church and prince most gracious and worthy of obedience, who mercifully and disinterestedly proffered to them the unburdened denizens of the forest, the enjoyment of liberty, and full participation in the blessings showered on the inhabitants of Hispaniola. All right. And that is the end of this chapter, right? So, I know the book is talking about, the tribes of Israel identified with the Aborigines of the, but in this chapter, they were just talking about, this calamities, this awful, slaughter and oppression of the American Indians, murder, their identity taken away, enslavement. This sounds so much like Deuteronomy 28, if you don't think so, right? These people, these peaceful people, they were being kind to the Spaniards, and look at everything they did to them, right? Here, just alone in Hispaniola and Haiti, there was a lot of prominent, probably people here from ancient kingdoms, a lot of chiefs, important people, possibly biblical people, holy people that they're doing this to, you know? And so can never forget, what happened, and, it's a lot of awful things we read today, but it's something we can't forget, just because these people went through a struggle, they tried, they stood up for their liberty, their land, their rights, their ancestors, everything, their culture, their identity, everything, their history. And eventually they got enslaved, they got Christianized, everything conquered, right? So, well, I hope you enjoyed the reading. Again, this is just happening in Haiti. And then remember who's this happening to. So remember by the 1700s, when there's a so-called Haitian revolution, and Dessalines is talking about, oh, yeah, our army is the army of the Incas, right? Why is he calling his army the army of the Incas, or an Indian reference, right? American Indians. Who are these people still with this passion to rebel? Look at the history here since they got here. Look what they did to the people in Haiti and Hispaniola. And of course, these people were tired by the 1700s. All right. Well, I'll give you your day back. I appreciate you guys taking the time to listen to me read the whole chapter. Hope you enjoyed it. All right. We got to remember the struggle. We got to remember what happened. And you got to see how it correlates with biblical stuff. All right. Why is this happening? Remember, we got to keep the code. Right? We got to keep the code and we'll be protected. All right. Much love and respect. Pura vida, mi gente. Wow.